What had happened was set in stone, and could not be changed. Not by mortals like them, and not in a nightmare. Or, at least, not in a third nightmare. Chapter 1538 Lord's Wisdom. While the chain breaker was receiving light repairs, the members of the cohort were left to their own devices. Those who had never been to Fallen Grace spent time exploring its island ships and getting to know the locals. Cassie was busy arranging things for when she was gone. Sonny did not really want to look at the beautiful city of eternal dusk. It made him wistful, and so he threw himself back into weaving, knowing that there was not much time left. He did, however, continue to observe the blind girl through one of his shadows, out of habit more than anything else, by now, since she had never done anything to confirm the accusations made by the Sin of Solace in the past 2 months. He also sent one of his shadows to keep an eye on Mordred. Sonny was certain that Cassie was doing the same, as well. The Prince of Nothing could not be trusted to be on his best behavior in a city full of people. Especially people who were inhabitants of a nightmare, and therefore no different from his countless victims in the Kingdom of Hope. But Mordred did not seem inclined to go on a massacre in Fallen Grace. In fact, he was mostly interested in its myths and legends, of all things, spending his days talking to people on the streets and listening to their stories. The people seemed to enjoy his company. On the 3rd day of their stay in the last human city, Sonny successfully altered the transcendent arrow memory Nephis had earned in Twilight, elevating its rank to Supreme. The onerous process of transplanting a new nexus and reinforcing the weave to withstand it left him drained and fatigued. So, Sonny decided to let himself rest and left the temple, eventually finding his way to the edge of the island ship. Sitting down there, he observed the busy canals of Fallen Grace and allowed his tired mind to rest. It was not long after that when Kronos found him, brimming with endless curiosity, just like always. Today, however, the teenagers at least tried to keep it in check. Noticing his strange behavior, Sonny raised his eyebrow and asked, "What's on your mind?" The young man hesitated for a while, but eventually asked, "Lord Sunless, I heard that you won't be returning from Verge. Is it true?" Sonny looked at him, frowning a little. Then, he looked away and sighed. "Sure. We aren't planning to die, mind you. It's just that we are outsiders. Once the defilement is destroyed, it's back to the outside for us." Kronos seemed saddened by that response. He stared at the water dejectedly. "What is it like, really? The world outside Ariel's tomb? What are you going to do after leaving here?" Sonny blinked a couple of times. Indeed, what would he do after leaving the nightmare? He had no idea. It was hard to tell, considering that the state of Antarctica, and the waking world in general, was entirely unknown. The war between Vela and Song would probably grow more intense. The nightmare gates would continue to pop into existence, slowly consuming the waking world and making it a part of the dream realm. No matter how much Sonny wanted to simply live a good life, he knew that these events would not let him remain a bystander. After a few moments of silence, he shrugged. "Well, it's more or less the same. There is no defilement, but there is still corruption. Nightmare creatures are running around devouring people, so awakened like me need to keep them in check. So I'll probably be battling some hideous abomination every other day, cursing loudly. That's life for you. The secret to a happy life, though, is to do all these things in good company. Oh, and in a place with good plumbing." He glanced at the teenager and smiled. "Why? What are you going to do after we get rid of the defilement? Are you really going to the House of Youth?" Kronos laughed awkwardly. "Well, I will, eventually. But probably not just yet." He looked into the distance, at the bustling streets of Fallen Grace, and sighed. "In truth, I've been sensing my soul essence recently, a bit. So I'll probably work on forming a soul core and becoming an awakened. Even if you and the other lords and ladies defeat the first seeker and vanquish the defilement, there will still be corrupted creatures left, threatening our city. Someone has to defend it after you leave." Kronos smiled. "Plus, I've always been interested in how the city works. All these people, all these moving parts, it's a bit of a miracle that a place like Fallen Grace can exist, don't you think? Lady Dusk has always been taking care of us. What are we going to do without her?" His eyes turned cloudy for a moment, but then shone brightly once again. Wiping them, he smiled again. "I want to make sure that Fallen Grace continues to exist, and thrive, just like she told us to. For myself, my wife, and our future children. Ah, but I'm just some brat. So, I figured I should become really strong first. Like you, Lord Sunless. So that people had no choice but to listen to what I had to say. Sunny looked at him incredulously. Kronos was, indeed, just some brat. But all great people whose deeds shaped history had been brats, once. Would this kid become a great leader, one day? Would his actions shape the future of Fallen Grace, and create a world where his children could grow up safe and happy? Would the stories of his deeds become legends, one day? Or would he disappear without a trace once the nightmare was complete? Sunny forced himself to smile. Strong like me? Brat, do you think people actually listen to what I have to say? Stronger. Become much stronger than me. Then, they'll listen. With that, he patted the teenager on the shoulder and rose to his feet. The charm memory waited to be altered. The day of their departure from Fallen Grace was drawing near. Stronger than you, my lord? But, no, that's just unreasonable. Sunny looked at the startled youth with a smile, then shook his head and headed away. Then be unreasonable. Imparting Kronos with that piece of questionable wisdom, he returned to the temple and spent a few sleepless hours going over his plans for altering the transcendent charm. He felt that he had already accounted for everything that could go wrong, so he would probably be ready to start the process once his essence was replenished by the Crown of Twilight. Just when the night fell, however, something distracted him from the preparations. After wasting its time 4 months, the shadow that had been following Cassie finally noticed something strange about her movements. Chapter 1539 Sybil's Secrets. Sunny was in his quarters, going over the plan for altering the transcendent charm. Outside, Fallen Grace was bathed in the beautiful glow of the iridescent water. The short night had descended on the world, shrouding the sky in absolute darkness. In that dark hour, Cassie was walking along the corridors of the temple, which wasn't that strange, in and of itself, if not for the fact that she was alone. Usually, the 2 deaf guards would be following behind her, but they were nowhere to be seen. The only thing accompanying the blind girl was the shadow Sunny had sent to keep an eye on her. Back in his quarters, he straightened and frowned, distracted from envisioning the complicated tapestry of the charm spellweave. What is she up to? Cassie had not given him any reason to feel worried in these past 2 months. Honestly, monitoring her movements was an afterthought by now. Sunny had certainly hoped that it would remain that way. Feeling a bit somber, he glanced at the motionless figure standing a few meters away. The Sin of Solace was staring at him silently, not bothering to say anything. However, his gaze expressed more than enough. Sunny winced, then looked away. Don't you glare at me. I'm sure it's nothing. He said that, but did not command the shadow to back away. Instead, he dedicated more of his attention to observing Cassie. The blind girl certainly did not seem pensive or secretive. She calmly walked along the winding stone corridors, tracing her fingers on the wall. Her other hand was holding the leather-bound journal. Maybe her guards are asleep. Sunny returned to considering the weave while keeping an eye on Cassie. She walked for quite some time, eventually entering the part of the temple that he was not familiar with. These chambers were used for preparing for public rituals, so Sunny had no business being there. Cassie, on the other hand, seemed very familiar with that area of the temple. She made a few more turns and stopped in front of an unassuming wooden door. A mundane-looking key appeared in her hand. Unlocking the door, Cassie entered a narrow staircase that led down, spiraling. Sunny's frown deepened. What the hell? She was already on the first floor of the temple. Why was there a way further down, into the frame of the island ship? But then again, maybe it was normal. The human cities on the Great River were kept in place by various means, ranging from sails and wind catchers to sorcerous mechanisms. Perhaps Cassie was on her way to inspect the moving parts of one such mechanism. She descended the stairs for some time before entering a dark and damp network of service tunnels running under the temple. Sunny had not known that there were such corridors there, but it made sense. The mechanisms responsible for allowing the island ship to resist the current had to be inspected and repaired from time to time. Fallen Grace, especially, was reliant on such mechanisms. It was situated not too far from the edge, after all, and so the pull of the current was more powerful here. Cassie walked along the dark corridors for a little bit and unlocked another door, entering a small chamber. Sunny was suddenly unable to concentrate on weaving anymore. His face darkened. The chamber was just what he had expected it to be. It housed a complicated mess of gears and chains that spun and moved, transferring the energy from the wind and the enchantment circuits into the underwater wheels that kept the island ship stationary. It was a bit like entering the insides of a tower clock, if that tower clock had been built with the help of sorcery. In a sense, Sonny was looking at the river civilization's version of spelltech. However, that was not what attracted his attention. The chamber and the intricate gears were what he had been expecting to see. What he had not expected, however, was that the floor of the chamber was broken, creating a rough, circular well. The menacing hole certainly did not look like something that had been planned by the builders of the temple. Instead, it looked like something that had been created much later, and much more violently. He could hear the sounds of flowing water coming from its dark depths. Why is there a well at the bottom of the Temple of Dusk? His shadow hid in the darkness of the underground chamber, observing Cassie carefully. The blind girl did not seem surprised by the presence of the strange well. Neither did she pay it any attention. Locking the door behind her, she circled around the open chasm and approached the opposite wall of the chamber. There, hidden behind a throng of spinning gears, a simple desk stood near the wall, with several chests and cabinets surrounding it. The underground chamber was absolutely dark, and there were no lanterns anywhere in sight. Of course, Cassie had no need for them. Coming closer to the desk, she lingered for a few moments, facing it with a distant expression. Then, she moved past it and kneeled near one of the chests, placing a hand on its heavy lid. Several strings of runes ignited on the wooden surface, and the chest opened noiselessly, revealing what was stored inside it. Sonny tilted his head, his expression turning somber. Inside the chest were leather-bound journals, just like the one Cassie was carrying. Dozens of them, or maybe even hundreds. There were several chests like that one in the underground chamber, as well, all locked with sorceress locks. The blind girl remained motionless for a while, then sighed deeply and placed the last journal on the pile. Then, she closed the lid of the chest, kept her hand on it for a few moments, and rose. Turning away, she approached the edge of the dark well and lowered her head, listening to the sounds of the flowing water with a distant expression. Cassie stood there for several minutes, unmoving. Separated from her by hundreds of meters and numerous stone walls, Sonny grew tense, ready to step through the shadows and appear in the underground chamber should something reach for the blind girl from the cold darkness. What the hell is that place? Did Dusk leave those things behind? It would make sense for the Sibyl who had lived in the temple for centuries to leave many traces here, including her personal records. However, what was with the ominous well leading to the dark waters? Sonny gritted his teeth. But in the end, nothing happened. Cassie clenched her fists, turned away from the underground well, and left the chamber the way she came. Ascending the narrow steps, she re-entered the temple proper and traced her way back to her quarters, entering them through a private passage. It was only then that Sonny allowed his tense body to relax. His mind, however, was anything but calm. Why would Dusk have a secret like that? He hesitated for a while, then felt a cold chill run down his spine. Or does it have nothing to do with Dusk, at all? Chapter 1540 Clouded Judgment. Audiobook by the Nut Lord. All text belongs to the original author, please support them online. This fan project is non-profit. Join the Discord for more audiobooks, and comment any mispronunciations so I can fix them. The feeling of restlessness Sonny had felt after leaving Twilight returned. Something strange was going on with Cassie, had been going on for a long time, maybe. He was almost sure of it. But it was the almost of it all that made the situation so difficult. He did not know what to do, confront her? Share his concern with others? What would he say? That Cassie should not have survived Twilight? None of them should have survived there, really. That she kept journals? There was nothing wrong with that, and claiming otherwise would only make him seem strange. That she was too quiet and unassuming, which made him feel as if she was hiding something vital from them? That sounded like paranoia talking. In fact, it was the sin of Solace whispering into his ear. The sin of Solace, whose only purpose was to drive him mad. Was he a fool to listen to these whispers? Sonny was not even sure himself what he was suspecting Cassie of, just that he did not feel comfortable with her secrets. But was it really because there was something off about the blind girl, or was it simply because he had never trusted her? Was he still secretly holding on to the grudge after what she had done on the Forgotten Shore, which painted his perception of her? Sonny would be lying if he said that he had let go of that grudge completely. None of the others seemed to suspect Cassie of anything, so why was he the only one looking for faults in her actions? Ah, damnation. What was he supposed to do? Did he even need to do anything? So what if Cassie had a pile of old journals? So what if she kept secrets? Was he the right person to blame someone for not being entirely honest? More than that, he had always known that Cassie kept much of what she knew to herself. In fact, Sonny was the reason why she had closed herself off. To begin with, he was the one who had told her how destructive of a poison her visions were, in the most cruel way he could think of, at that. Her personality had only begun to change after that bitter conversation they had in the medical complex of the academy, right after coming back from the Forgotten Shore. Nephis was aware that Cassie knew much more than she was letting on, too. She had told him so herself, during one of their conversations on the Ivory Island. So why was Sonny reacting so strongly now? Because we are so close to victory. Because this nightmare was so dreadful, and its end was swiftly approaching. Sonny was nervous that something would ruin their chances of returning to the waking world, and the ominous shadow of torment was the last thing standing between them and salvation. Torment had never appeared before them, and so, she was as frightening as their imaginations could make her. Perhaps Cassie was just a substitute for all that fear. Or perhaps there was really something ominous going on with the blind seer. Oh, she is definitely planning to betray you. Again. The Sin of Solace smiled, looking at him with dark amusement. Sonny cursed and threw a wooden tray at the sword wraith. The tray passed through the apparition and fell to the floor, clattering loudly. The hateful wraith laughed. Fool, you are simply incapable of learning, are you? Even after what she did to you, what she took from you, you are still willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. No wonder you ended up being made a slave by her, and she never even apologized. I bet she doesn't feel even a little bit remorseful about her betrayal. Since she doesn't, what is going to stop her from turning on you again? Sonny glared at the Sin of Solace, then took a deep breath. He slowly calmed down. That doesn't even make any sense. At least try to be convincing when you are spouting nonsense, will you? Sonny was prejudiced against Cassie, that much was apparent. Deep in his heart, he still harbored resentment toward her. He valued and cared for her, as well, but that was beside the point. Humans were complicated and contradictory creatures, indeed, just like Nephis had said, they could love and hate someone at the same time. Because Sonny's judgment was clouded, it was easy to find fault with Cassie. But if he flipped his perception and looked at the situation from a different angle, trying to find the opposite, any suspicion that the blind girl could have been doing something to harm the cohort would crumble. It was a preposterous idea. Almost every action Cassie had taken was for their benefit. They would have never made it that far without her. From start to finish, she had been nothing but a selfless ally, putting herself in harm's way on numerous occasions. Finding the scattered members of the cohort, escaping Alethia's island, surviving the depths of the great river, none of that would have been possible without her. So, no matter what secret Cassie was keeping, it was not something that would harm the cohort. Sonny had no reason to worry about that. After realizing that, he felt his heart calming down. But then, it suddenly felt heavy once again. Because while Sonny did not have a reason to worry about the cohort, there might have been a reason to worry about Cassie. She's not preparing herself for something drastic, is she? A deep scowl appeared on his face once again. He remained silent for a while, then shook his head. No, she wouldn't. Cassie might seem soft, but she is one of the strongest people I know. She's much stronger than anyone gives her credit for. Still, a tiny seed of doubt remained. Sonny cursed quietly, threw a hateful glance at the Sin of Solace, and turned his attention back to the transcendent charm. The day of their departure was swiftly approaching, so he had to perform the alteration as soon as possible. Chapter 1541 Into the Sunset. On the last night before their departure from Fallen Grace, Sonny let out a deep sigh and listened to the spell whisper into his ear. Your memory has been destroyed. You have received a memory. With that, the transcendent charm he had been working on had become a supreme one. Its enchantment, which enhanced the material properties of objects, was further strengthened. Not only was the nexus of its weave more potent now, but the weave itself had also been made more robust to withstand the increased pressure. Strings of ethereal light were intertwined with the black threads of shadow essence, forming a mesmerizing tapestry. Sonny took a deep breath. 4 down, 1 to go. He had saved the hardest memory for last, the transcendent memory of the 7th tier meant for Nephis. That one, he was going to have to alter on their way to Verge. Things were happening so fast now. Looking back at what he had experienced in the nightmare, it was hard to believe how close the end of it all was. It seemed like Sonny had been sharing the catch with Nephis and Anant just yesterday, but now, he was approaching the finish line. Dismissing the charm, he rose and stretched his limbs, then left his quarters. It was night, but no one in Fallen Grey seemed to be asleep. While Sunny was passing by the windows, he saw numerous people crowding the streets on the neighboring island ships. They were all looking at the White Temple, knowing that their lady, and the outsider warrior she had gathered, were going to leave come dawn, or rather, dusk. Leave to challenge the very source of the defilement. It was not an exaggeration to say that their fates depended on the result of their journey. However, looking at these people, Sunny did not feel that they were concerned for themselves. It seemed like they were concerned about Dusk and her outsider companions, instead. Funny. Sunny could not remember the last time he had watched someone go into battle on his behalf. It must have happened occasionally, but he was usually the one doing the fighting. In Antarctica, he had carried thousands of refugees on his back across the frozen hellscape, which had seemed like a burden at the time. But, in a sense, he would have been burdened watching someone fight and die for him more. So, he could easily understand the complicated storm of emotions brewing in the hearts of the people being left behind in Fallen Grace. He often complained about how harsh and unforgiving the life of an awakened was, but it was also a privilege. Consumed by such detached thoughts, he entered the hall where Cassie was giving the last orders to the people who would be ruling the city in her absence. Some of them he knew, like the captain of the soldiers or the carpenter who had been in charge of repairing the chain breaker, while others were strangers. All of them bowed respectfully when he entered. Lord Sunless. He nodded at them and approached Cassie, then placed a hand on her shoulder. A spark of energy traveled between them as the supreme charm was transferred from his soul to hers. Here, all done. The enchantment is substantially more powerful now. It also consumes much more essence, so be careful. She summoned the charm, which was shaped like a jade flower, and weighed it on her hand. Soon, the petals of the ornament ignited with a soft glow, hinting that its enchantment was activated. At the same time, the hilt of the quiet dancer glistened. A faint smile appeared on Cassie's lips. "Thank you." Sunny nodded, then hesitated for a few moments. There were too many people around them, so he couldn't be too free in what he said. Still, he didn't want to remain entirely silent. Eventually, he removed his hand from her shoulder and asked, his voice serious. "Listen. Are you all right?" Cassie raised an eyebrow, seemingly confused. "Sure. Why wouldn't I be? I'm better than ever." There was a rare hint of sincere relief and anticipation in her voice. Sunny frowned, lingered for a moment, then nodded again and turned to leave. In truth, he had wanted to use this opportunity to retrieve the shadow that followed Cassie around. But hearing that answer, he changed his mind. Keep her company for a little while longer. Who in their right mind would be relived in such a situation? Leaving the shadow behind, he left the hall and went to find the other members of the cohort. The night ended quickly, and the 7 suns rose from the waters of the great river once more. Fallen Grace was once again painted by the vivid radiance of the blazing sunset, drowning in its crimson splendor. The soldiers, all wearing their white armor, had formed a corridor on the streets of the floating city. Their gazes were solemn as they watched the 7 outsiders leave the temple and walk toward the piers. Separated by that living wall, the crowd of citizens was watching them, too. This time, there were no cheers. Instead, everyone was silent, which felt a little eerie. Feeling the weight of countless gazes, Sunny was reminded of the docks of Falcon Scott on the last day of evacuation, for some reason. Back then, people had been desperately trying to get on the last leaving ship, knowing that everyone who stayed behind would die. Today, the situation was exactly opposite. The people staying behind were going to be safe. The ones who were sailing away would be risking their lives. However, the atmosphere was strangely similar. Desperate desire that could not be expressed with words. Fear, longing, and shame. Sorrow, grief, and pain. And hope. Hope was such a powerful and resilient thing. Unreasonable, even. It could bloom even in the most terrible of situations, bringing with it strength to go on. Sunny knew hope better than most. And hopelessness, too. They reached the pier and boarded the chain breaker. Turning back, Sunny looked at the crowd one last time. Most of these youths looked unfamiliar, even if he knew them from before. Their appearance had changed now. He did, however, notice Kronos standing in one of the first rows, accompanied by a pretty young woman. Noticing him looking, the teenager smiled and waved. This guy. Sunny smiled and waved, as well. He even winked, making the brat look startled. This is what we're fighting for, I guess. In a way. There was a little empty space in front of the gangway leading to the ship. Cass's 2 deaf guards were standing there, looking up at her with lost gazes. She turned around and faced the crowd. This time, however, there was no speech. The blind girl remained silent for a few moments, then addressed her guards instead. "Thank you. You two are free, now." They were looking at her, unable to hear those words. She smiled softly. "Thank you for everything. Take care of yourselves. And of each other." The 2 ascended seemed to sway slightly, then knelt silently. The woman let go of the hilt of her sword. The man dropped his silk cord into the water. Tears were streaming down their weathered faces. Cassie sighed lightly, bowed deeply to the crowd, and turned away. "Let's go. It's time for us to leave." Soon, the chain breaker departed from the pier and rose into the sky. They were flying into the blazing sunset, disappearing into its blood-red glow. Forever. Chapter 1542 Last Journey. And there it was. They had left on the last journey of this tumultuous, dreadful nightmare. For Sunny and Nephis, it was especially poignant, because they had come from the far reaches of the future, and were now on their way to the furthest reaches of the past, where Verge stood. It must have been especially emotional for Cassie, as well, because she was leaving the city she had spent a whole year ruling and trying to preserve. Now, its fate depended on whether they would be successful in their battle against the First Seeker. In any case, she would never see Fallen Grace again. None of them knew if it would even exist, in any kind of way, should they prevail. However, it was inevitable for Fallen Grace to be destroyed should they fail. The blind girl did not look back. Instead, she stood at the bow of the flying ship, facing the setting suns. The others gave her some space, knowing that there had to be a storm of complicated emotions weighing on her heart. Only Sunny could see her face, visible to the shadow that was hiding close by. Cass's face was not wistful or sad. Instead, it was full of resolve and determination, impatience, even. It was as though she had been waiting for this moment for a long, long time. Which was true, of course. Apart from Mordred, she had spent by far the longest in this nightmare. Sunny knew that he was sick and tired of the tomb of Ariel. The blind girl had to be feeling the same, but much more intensely. "We've been here for so long." Sunny had come to Ariel's tomb far away from here. He had spent time with Nephis, come to care for and then lost Ankh, traveled to Fallen Grace and got to know the culture of the river people there, fought against all kinds of underwater horrors on the way to Alethia's island, withstood the insidious hell of the time loop, dove into the depths of the great river and emerged from the other side, battled against the defiled saints in twilight. It was hard to believe, but he had spent more time in the tomb of Ariel than in Antarctica, not to mention the Kingdom of Hope. Cassie, though, she had been here longer than even on the Forgotten Shore. And that was without even counting the unknown number of cycles the 7 of them had lived through before arriving at this one, hopefully, the last. The chain breaker soared above the waves, flying toward the edge. Sunny spent some time enjoying the view of the blazing river, then rubbed his face and retreated to his cabin. There, he concentrated on preparing for the alteration of Neph's silver blade. Now that they were en route to Verge, he felt a sense of urgency and wanted to finish with it as soon as possible. A day passed in meticulous work, then another. On the 3rd day, they reached the duskward edge of the great river. It was much like the dawnward edge, but also different. The enormous, inconceivable waterfall was the same. The powerful current that threatened to destroy anything plunged into its crushing embrace was the same. The dark void beyond the edge was the same, as well. But the light here was entirely different from the soft lilac glow of dawn. Instead of the tender radiance, the water here was burning with an intense crimson glow, almost like it was on fire. The inconceivable waterfall that stretched in both directions as far as the eye could see was painted vibrant red, as well. It was almost as if a sea of blood was spilling into a boundless, dark abyss. Enthralled by that dreadful sight, the members of the cohort gathered on the deck. The distant whispers of the falling water had grown into a deafening roar, making it hard to speak. So, they remained silent. The chain breaker crested the breaking point of the waterfall and flew into the abyssal darkness, leaving the great river behind. Soon, the roar of the edge grew quieter, and then disappeared in the howling of the wind. They had returned to the dark abyss of the interior of Ariel's tomb. This time, however, their journey was going to be different from the previous time they had visited the boundless darkness. That was because, unlike the first time, the chain breaker would be crossing the space within the loop of the great river, as opposed to the empty space between it and the walls of the pyramid. None of them knew what exactly would be waiting for them there, but at least there was no threat of the terrifying swarm of the dark butterflies becoming aware of their presence, since they would not be coming anywhere near the walls of the pyramid, where the great monsters slumbered. They also did not know how long the journey across the empty space in the middle of the looping river would take. The last time, they had arrived back to the surface of the great river rather quickly, but that was because space itself behaved strangely inside the pyramid. Still, it was going to be much faster than simply sailing all the way to the dawn of time. They were going to reach the waters surrounding Verge in a week, 2 at most, if nothing unforeseen happened. Sunny studied the darkness for some time, feeling both wary of the challenge ahead and ready to face it. Then, he gritted his teeth and went back to working on the silver blade. The mind-numbing complexity of weaving calmed him down, eradicating all unnecessary thoughts. Soon, this nightmare will be over soon. Sunny refused to think that they would fail. However, now that they were nearing the end of this dreadful tale, the thoughts that he had banished a long time ago were returning. The thoughts about the fate of Antarctica, of the refugees he had so desperately tried to protect. What was happening to the waking world right now? How was Rain doing? Was she healthy and safe, or infected by the nightmare spell and in the throes of going through her own trials? Knowing that he could not allow himself to get distracted at this critical point, he suppressed these thoughts again. He was going to find out sooner than later, anyway. If he survived. So, what Sunny had to do right now was make sure that he survived, and that his friend survived, as well. He had to fulfill the promise he had given, and conquer this nightmare. At all costs. Chapter 1543 Pride of a Craftsman. Just as it was in the black void beyond the great river, the space itself acted strangely in the empty space contained at the center of endless loop of flowing water. The chain breaker had been traversing the vast emptiness for a while now, at least a day or two, from how it felt, but Sunny was not at all sure how far they had traveled. All he knew was that the point of the great river from which they had left seemed far away now, while the point which they hoped to reach was not as distant. It shimmered in the darkness, both alluring and terrifying. Navigating the flying ship toward Verge was not very hard, because it was situated near the source. So, all they had to do was aim for the last stretch of clear water before the area of the great river shrouded in hazy mist. A long time ago, close to the start of the nightmare, Sunny had an epiphany that the strength of his allies was his own power, as well. Therefore, he had become determined to increase the strength of the cohort as much as he could, in any way he could. He had been faithful to that determination up until now. Apart from the very action of gathering every member of the cohort from across the tomb of Ariel, that had mostly taken the form of arming them with powerful memories. Sunny had spent much of his time developing and improving his skill as a sorcerer for that purpose. Now, his ability to weave had improved tremendously compared to the start of the nightmare. Studying Anank's mantle had allowed him to make a qualitative leap in understanding of the fundamental principles of weaving, and by studying many memories in order to alter them, Sunny had improved his overall ability, as well. As a result, Nefer's Crown of Dawn had become a supreme memory. That was still his most valuable achievement, because that single memory was able to empower all the rest of the memories at their disposal. Of course, Sunny had not stopped there. He had also provided his allies with 4 additional altered memories. Kai, Effie, and Cassie now wielded them, preparing to use his gifts in the battle against Torment, the First Seeker, and the remnant forces of the Defilement. His help was not limited to memories, either. Whether on purpose or not, Sunny had also helped his friends grow stronger as individual warriors. Jet had received her Aspect Legacy and was now wielding the Chilling Mist Blade. Kai had acquired the Dragon Slayer attribute, which enhanced his body and elemental resistance. Nephis seemed to have regained her lost confidence. Her understanding of her divine aspect had deepened, and with it came the knowledge of fire, one of the boons of her mysterious Aspect Legacy. She was also a Titan now. Sunny had grown vastly stronger than he used to be, as well. Not even mentioning his sorcery, here in the Tomb of Ariel, he had mastered the 4th step of Shadow Dance and perfected the Shadow Shell technique. He had become a terror. 2 of his shadows had evolved, growing much more powerful. A version of him from before Antarctica would have been like a child in front of him at the end of the harrowing Southern campaign. But that version of him, in turn, would stand no chance against his current self. And somewhere between the two, there was a version of himself that Sunny never wanted to meet, let alone fight. The Mad Prince, which had come and gone, changing everything. Are we ready? Still, despite all that growth and power, Sunny could not allow himself to stop until the nightmare was conquered, and the spell called for him to wake up. So, he threw himself into weaving, trying to finish the last alteration while the chain breaker was still traversing the black void. The process was not going splendidly. The silver blade he was trying to alter was a transcendent memory of the seventh tier, and possessed many enchantments. Its weave was inconceivably vast and intricate, and although he was not trying to change it entirely, he still needed to study every part of it in great detail. If anything, trying to isolate and transplant a single nexus was proving to be much harder than simply altering the entirety of a spellweave. The elaborate tapestry of essence strings was deeply interconnected, no single thread existed in isolation, instead crossing and touching numerous other threads. Much like fate. The string of a person's fate did not exist in isolation, either; it touched the fates of countless other people, stretching from the past into the future, and thus influenced, and was influenced by, the greater flow of fate. But Sunny was nothing if not resourceful. Weaving strings of fate was beyond what mortals like him could achieve, but he could manipulate strings of soul essence with great finesse. Therefore, he could alter the weave of the silver blade to make sure that the nexus he was transplanting only burdened the pattern of a single enchantment, without breaking the balance of all the rest. He had to add new patterns in some places, and cut the others down to match. Those that were cut had to be restored, of course, albeit taking a different shape. Slowly but surely, countless lightless threads of shadow essence became intertwined with the radiant strings of ethereal light. He had forgotten about all else, pulling on everything he had learned about weaving to accomplish his task. From his first tentative attempts at creating sorcery, back in the bloody menagerie of monsters under the arena of the Red Colosseum, to creating memories for the brilliant Emporium, to improving the soul arsenals of his soldiers in Antarctica and creating the siege souvenir to slay Goliath, to learning from Anant's mantle and altering the crown of dawn. All the lessons he had learned were put to use, allowing him to create a lethal sword for Nephis. He knew that she would achieve incredible things by wielding this weapon. And if he managed to accomplish his ambitious alteration, every achievement she made with the silver sword would, in small part, also be his. Sunny, who had always been a fighter, was feeling a strange exhilaration as he worked on the complicated memory. It was the unfamiliar, but rewarding pride of a craftsman who was confident in the usefulness of his work. And then, finally, everything was ready. Summoning 2 pairs of shadow hands, Sunny took a deep breath, picked up Weaver's needle, and got to work. Time seemed to slow down as his 6 hands moved through the vast tapestry of glowing strings, snapping some and weaving new ones into the intricate pattern. Drops of sweat fell from his brow, but he did not pay it any attention. His expression remained calm and composed, utter focus permeating his gaze. Golden sparks ignited in the depths of his altered eyes, and his fingertips felt the slightest vibration spreading through the essence strings. From time to time, his skin was cut, but no blood seeped out of the cuts. He did not allow the pain to distract him, either. Wondrous. Sunny felt exhilarated as he weaved sorcery. And then, he felt overjoyed. Lowering his hands, Sunny let out a long sigh and listened to the spell announcing the destruction of a memory, and the creation of a new one. He had succeeded. And now that he did, there were no more preparations to be made. All that remained was to reach Verge and use everything little bit of strength he had accumulated to destroy the first Seeker, and escape this dreadful nightmare. Chapter 1544 Innermost Void. After returning the silver blade to Nephis, and failing to say anything meaningful to her, Sunny did not have much to do. He spent some time with Kai, Effie, and Jet, enjoyed a good night of sleep, and then assumed his usual spot under the branches of the sacred tree to meditate. Everything that could have been done was already done. They had prepared as best they could, at least he thought they did. Now, all that remained was to clear his mind and prepare himself mentally for the coming battle. Sunny and his companions spent the rest of the time the chain breaker was traversing the empty void, clearing their minds and steeling their hearts. The battle they faced promised to be a dire one. But, honestly, Sunny did not find it hard to calm his mind and get ready to face whatever it was that would come. There were only so many times he could feel nervous to the point of losing sleep before a decisive battle. He had experienced so many bloody clashes in Antarctica that anticipating another one had long become an ordinary event. Preparing for one mentally was not only a skill, but also a habit. So, Sunny found himself feeling strangely calm. He slowly went over his experiences in the Tomb of Ariel, consolidating his insights and shoring up his fundamentals. Rapid growth was most welcome, but failing to digest his many gains properly could leave him unstable. He had to eliminate all instability before reaching Verge. Others were doing the same, each in their own fashion. While Sunny meditated under the sacred tree, Nephis practiced with her new sword, getting used to its weight and powers. Jet had found a hammock, somewhere, and was comfortably asleep in it. Effie was enjoying the snacks she had prepared for herself. Kai was practicing a strange, outwardly inefficient form of archery while absent-mindedly humming a song. Cassie was steering the ship, which seemed to calm her down. Mordred, morbidly enough, was inspecting his collection of bodies. Those of them that had belonged to Awakened each possessed their own unique powers, so he was probably coming up with plans of when and where to use them best. That guy is such a creep. Sunny shook his head, and then went to inspect his shadows, which were created from the dead creatures he had killed. Not creepy at all, surely. Everything seemed to be in order. Everyone was ready. But before they could return to the Great River, an unexpected event threw a wrench into their plans. Sunny was on his way to the bow when a loud boom resounded from below the deck, and the entire ship suddenly shook. Gritting his teeth, he immediately stepped through the shadows and appeared at the galley, which seemed to have been the place where the booming sound originated. He had expected to see some harrowing nightmare creature that had come from the void and infiltrated the chain breaker, or perhaps Mordred trying to kill one of the members of the cohort, but nothing like that was happening. Instead, he only saw Effie standing near the bulkhead, hissing curses. Her fist had crashed through the durable wood, splintering and cracking it. Her other hand was resting on her belly,